Hello, good morning and welcome to a special Sophy Ridge on Sunday. We're live at the Conservative Party conference here in Birmingham for you. Well, what a difference a year makes. 12 months ago, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson were speaking to a Conservative Party in pretty good spirits less than 2 years after a huge election victory. Well, the mood has, to put it mildly, changed. It's hard to think of a more difficult combination of problems facing a new Prime Minister taking her first conference as leader. As Labour extends huge poll leads, both Liz Truss and the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, will give speeches that could already decide their political fate. Meanwhile, there's talk of a budget rebellion by her own MPs, possible letters of no confidence, and a row over a new age of austerity. All that, of course, with the mortgage market in chaos and pressure on the pound. The new PM may already be in survival mode. Well, we have got a great list of guests to take you through that story for you. In a moment, we'll be joined here in conference by the chair of the Conservative Party, Jake Berry. And here on his own patch, we've got the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street. With the Conservatives' plans under extreme scrutiny by businesses and the markets, we'll be talking to the Director General of the UK's biggest business organisation, the CBI, that is Tony Danker. And the Treasury Committee has criticised the Chancellor for not releasing official forecasts of his spending plans. Its chair, Mel Stride, will join us. And we'll also be talking to the former Junior Minister and Conservative MP, Heather Wheeler, on the show. And another very important guest for us, after Russia's illegal annexation of some 15% of the country, we'll be talking to the Ukraine MP, Lesia Vasylenko. Good morning. Great to have you with us here in Birmingham this morning. Well, joining us now is the chair of the Conservative Party and also leading voice from Red Wall Conservative MPs, Jake Berry. Great to have you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
With us. Right, first things first. Let's get something cleared up. Hours after the mini-budget last Friday, did you celebrate with the Chancellor and a group of hedge fund managers at a champagne reception?
Well, look, we often have drinks receptions for donors in the Conservative Party, and in fact these people should be lauded because we don't have public funding of political parties, and these are people who go out, make money and donate to political parties in the same way as they do for the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. In terms of that get-together, it wasn't a get-together of hedge fund managers, it was actually Britain's sort of leading entrepreneurs. Yes, I was there, but it's the sort of normal drumbeat of treasurers at events, as we call them in the Conservative Party, that we have all the time.
So there weren't hedge fund managers there?
I mean, I'm sure there were, or there was, I think, one that I know of, but in terms of the rest of the people there, lots of them are people who've grown and start businesses. In fact, the conversations I had, because it was my job before I did this, was people who work in the property industry. And what they were all saying is they back this government's drive to create growth in the economy because they understand that you cannot have a rising tide of prosperity that flows under every door in this country without first creating growth in the economy.
Just want to look at the optics of this event. The details are in the Sunday Times this morning. So as the markets crashed, you acknowledge you were at the multi-million-pound Chelsea home of a Tory donor, along with other donors, including hedge funders, financiers, many of whom may have made money from the crash in the pound. How is that in any way appropriate?
Well, I'm not sure that any of them did make money from the crash in the pound, and of course you will know that the pound's actually had its best week against the dollar since 2020. If you look at the close this week. Before we start casting aspersions against what people may or may have not done,
whose home was it?
Absolutely clear. Well, I think people can read the Times if they want to. Let's be absolutely clear.
It's the home of somebody who has acknowledged taking short positions on the pound before.
Let's be absolutely clear. This is part of the normal drumbeat of treasurer events within the Conservative Party. I was there was no confidential information that was discussed. It was a sort of a get-together with some of Britain's leading entrepreneurs, who, by the way, we should thank for creating growth in our economy and being on this drive to create growth for every ordinary working family in this country, about our plans for growing the economy.
How was the Chancellor's mood as he drank champagne?
Well, I'm not even sure that the Chancellor was drinking champagne. I think he was drinking a soft drink. He was absolutely clear that he has set out a path for this country to create growth, and the reason we want to create growth is to ensure that every family who is really worried about things like their mortgage rate would have been terrified if the government hadn't have taken action on energy bills. People seem to forget that just a few weeks ago, we were talking about 4 million businesses going bust. We were talking about tens of millions of people losing their job. We were talking about the average household having an energy bill of £6,000.
And now we're talking about 40% of mortgages being taken off the market, and we're talking about the Bank of England having to step in with a £65 billion bailout in order to stop a run on pension funds.
Through the action the government has taken, we have cut on average £1,000 from people's energy bills. We have stopped those millions of budgets going bust. Look, on the mortgage market, I understand there is concern.
What would you say to people who are really concerned about the mortgage market?
What I would say to them is the government is working both with the Bank of England, and you saw that both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have been working with the OBR and the Bank of England to ensure that we have stability in the mortgage market. I don't believe that will come. I understand it's a distressing time for people. I understand people are worried about their mortgage, but, you know, the government is working to ensure that we have stability in that market for every household in this country.
Now, the Sunday Times article also says the Chancellor gave insights, as they put it, into future government spending cuts at the event. Can you rule that out, that he made those comments?
Well, I certainly didn't hear him make those comments.
Have you asked him whether he did?
Well, I was there, so I listened to what he said, and what he talked about was his plan for growth. And what he had said.
But you can't categorically rule out that he didn't have those conversations with anyone at the event, can you?
Well, I can't categorically rule it out because I didn't hear every conversation he had. But in terms of what you asked me, is the Chancellor made a statement or a speech talking about future plans. I can categorically rule out that in that speech, which is what I heard, we were all having our own conversations, of course.
But we don't know about the other conversations.
I mean, you don't know about conversations that people have privately.
No, but I would ask him before coming on a programme like this.
So, no, I can categorically rule out that in terms of the address he made to the group of people who were there as part of this normal Treasurer's event, he did not give any insight into future plans, and I'm sure in terms of his private conversations, he didn't give any insight. OK,
well, let's look at the future plans now. Are you going to cut spending to bring public finances under control?
Well, I think every household understands that actually the reason this government is going for growth is because when you're struggling with your household budget, as many households are, you need to grow your personal household budget, in many cases people's pay packets, that's why we're going for growth, but you also need to manage your expenditure. And I don't think it's unreasonable for the government to say that the public sector should look at its expenses in the same way that every single household is doing in this country.
So that means...
Well, what we've heard from the government is there's going to be a drive to trim fat in terms of government expenditure.
Trim fat. You use that word, trim fat. What do you mean by trim fat?
Well, I think everyone would accept that, you know, there are efficiencies that can be found in terms of...
Where is the fat?
Well, I'll give you one example. You know, the government has set out ways in which it's going to seek to recover the bounce-back loans, many of which were taken incorrectly. We heard about the whole-scale fraud in bounce-back loans. That's a way we can recover money.
How much money is that, though? Come on. I mean, we're currently spending more on debt interest payments than the entire education budget. You're going to have to find a lot of fat.
Well, isn't that the reason the government... That's the reason the government wants to grow the economy. Because we have a choice.
That's why I'm asking you directly. Yeah, where is the fat?
Well, let me answer the question, then. We have a choice in front of us, don't we? We can keep doing more of the same, which is low growth, high taxes, stagflation, as it's called, or we can do what the government has done, which is try and create high growth with a lower tax economy. And the reason to do that, like every household budget I've mentioned earlier, the reason to do that is if you have increasing bills, you have two choices. You can either cut the bills, cut your usage, or you can increase the amount of money you have coming into the household. That is exactly what this government is trying to do. We are trying to increase the amount of money coming in, i.e. grow the economy. We're not doing that as some academic exercise. We're doing it because it's right for every household in this country. While at the same time, it would be completely irresponsible of any government not to say, in the way that households are finding savings in their budget, it would be completely irresponsible to say the public sector or government departments should in some way be immune from the decisions that other households are having to take.
Well, in the same way that people who are earning the, over £150,000 a year will be immune as they're getting a tax cut?
Well, they are, you're right, they are getting a tax cut, but that's because these are the entrepreneurs who drive our economy. But the more important thing is that every single person in work... Let me finish, please. Every single person in work, when their payslip drops through the letterbox next month, will have had their national insurance cut. Every single person who's got an energy bill, when their energy bill drops through the letterbox this month, we'll see that the government has capped prices to help with household budgets. And on the question of energy bills, as a percentage of GDP, as a government, we have done more than any other government in Europe to support households. And I think more than anything else, that shows how we're on the side of working households.
I just want to come in on the phrase that you used about entrepreneurs who drive the economy, because I do think that a lot of workers will find that quite offensive, to be completely honest. You're talking about the very wealthy driving the economy. But what about all the other people who also drive the economy? And we know, don't we, from analysis, that it's only the people at the top, the richest people, who are going to benefit overall from the tax changes that were introduced in the budget.
Sorry, we don't know that from analysis. I'm sorry, that is complete and utter
because
nonsense.
Because of the changes to the personal allowance.
No, I'm sorry, that is simply incorrect. So let's put it on the record what we are doing. Every single working person in this country is going to see a cut in their national insurance next month, this month now. And we also know that the lower paid in this country, as a percentage of their income, pay more in national insurance than higher earners. So, in fact, if there's a percentage of income, it is giving a bigger tax cut to those lower earners than it is to the top earners. So I'm saying what you're saying is simply incorrect. Your analysis is wrong, and I am proud to be part of a government that is prioritising tax cut for every worker in this country, not just those on the top end.
Are benefits going to increase in line with inflation?
Well, look, I'm not going to come on here and make financial statements. That's a matter for the Chancellor, and we will know in due course what is going to happen with benefits.
They would have got £19 a week more, wouldn't they, if the changes announced by Rishi Sunak to uprate benefits in line with inflation had gone on. How much, given the inflation pressures, given what we've seen with energy bills, as you acknowledged, going up, food inflation double figures, how much more a week do you think people in benefits should be able to have to really meet that pressure? What, £19 a week, is that too much? £10 a week,
well,
nothing?
I've already said I won't make, it's not for me to make fiscal announcements in relation to benefits. I know and understand, and this government knows and understands the huge pressures that households are facing, and that's why we are pivoting to grow the economy. Because, in fact, it's only by growing the economy that we can ensure that Britain can get a pay rise, we can ensure that people get really decent public services that they rely on, and we can also ensure that we can properly fund both our public services, but all the other things the government has to do. Like, we are, seeing threats from the east. We need to properly fund our armed forces. We need to properly fund the police. We need to properly fund our NHS. That is the reason we're growing the economy. And it's for every working household in this country that we are doing that.
I just want to have a look, if I may, at a chart. This is analysis from the Resolution Foundation. Now, this is showing the impact of the tax changes in the budget, and also, if I know you haven't confirmed
I can actually see it.
Yeah, if you haven't confirmed, they haven't confirmed it, the expected changes that we could see to universal credit if their benefits do not rise in line with inflation, and you can see there. It is the very richest households, those on the right of the screen, who are going to be benefiting because of your policy changes. All those people on the bottom, impacted by the benefits, those on lower incomes, negatively impacted. Is that fair?
Right, I'm really sorry, I can't actually see the table. What I go back and say is that what we're doing for every household in this country is ensuring that they get a cut in their tax bill next month when that pay slip drops through the letterbox or arrives via our email. We've taken action on energy bills, which people were, we were going to lose tens of millions of jobs in this country because of the cost of energy for business. We've taken action that isn't now going to happen. We were going to see inflation peak at 19%, predicted to peak at 19%. Because we've taken action on energy bills, that now won't happen. Inflation isn't some academic figure that bankers and economists and politicians and journalists like talking about. It has a huge impact on every household in this country. That is why we're taking action. That is why we want to grow the economy, because we want every single household to benefit from economic growth.
The reports in the papers today that Liz Truss advised King Charles not to attend the next COP climate change summit. He, of course, is someone who has been quite supportive, shall we say, of the green agenda. Can you commit to the net zero carbon emissions target by 2050?
The government remains committed to the net zero target by 2050.
So that's not going to change.
So it's a yes.
OK, thank you. I appreciate the clear answer in that. And now I just want to look a bit overall at the direction you're taking. Because in the Telegraph, you've got an article today. You say we're overturning the tired economic orthodoxy that's prevailed for decades and are forging a new direction for the country. How big a change is this?
Well, look, it's further to say how big a change is. I've been really clear what we're doing. We're seeking to create growth in the economy. I've been really clear about why we're doing it. We are doing it to ensure that there is a rising spring tide of prosperity that flows through every household in this country. That's what we're doing. That's why we're doing it. And it's because this government's values are on the side of hard-working families across the UK.
From your quote there, a new direction for the country, overturning the orthodoxy that's prevailed for decades, so Conservative administrations as well as Labour ones. What's your mandate to change what multiple governments have done?
Well, certainly the Prime Minister. We have a mandate on a 2019 manifesto. And don't forget that 2019 manifesto set out two things. It set out that we wouldn't increase taxes. And in fact, we've complied with that by reversing the national insurance rise. It set out that we would drive to create economic growth. And that's exactly what the Prime Minister's doing. We have an absolute mandate from that manifesto and we will continue to deliver.
Do you really believe you've got an absolute mandate from that manifesto? There was nothing about scrapping the 45p rate of tax. Boris Johnson promised the government wouldn't go back to austerity. He won a landslide promising big spending, more nurses, more funding for schools, more police in seats like yours, Rossendale and Darwin.
You're absolutely right. That is why we're trying to create growth.
But you're also talking about public spending cuts. You're talking about trimming the fat. That is very different language from Boris Johnson in that 2019.
I think the British public would expect this government. There's no such thing as government money; it's taxpayers' money.
But do you not acknowledge the key shift in this government and what has gone on before? You have said that you're about to rip up the orthodoxy of decades of previous governments. How can you say that you had a mandate from the last election? You don't.
Well, I think the British public, just to answer your question, would rightly expect this government, when we are spending their money, it's not government money, it's their money, would rightly expect this government to make the difficult choices to ensure that they're... No, sorry, I'm answering the question that I was halfway through when you interrupted me. With this government to ensure that we do not waste their money and we deliver efficient public services. Look, on the orthodoxy, I don't think that it's a new orthodoxy for the Conservative Party to say that it wants to deliver growth. And what we have seen over the last couple of decades is a high-tax, low-growth economy. And the truth is that if we are going to change that, not for the government, not for bankers, as you sought to say earlier, saying this is the government's motivation. It's for working households. It's for working households in this country. That's what we're doing. It's the right motivation. And in truth, it's how households work. People know that when their bills arrive, they can either cut their consumption or they can get higher salary or higher wages, go out there and get that new job.
Sure, it's
That's the approach the government is taking.
We are saying, look, let's
create growth so households can afford their bills, as well as the brilliant work we're doing on energy bills.
You were talking about what people expect to see from government, what the public would like. And let's have a quick look, shall we, at YouGov poll from Thursday. Now, I accept there have been different polls, but this one from Thursday, YouGov poll showing Labour has a 33-point lead. Now, and I know polls fluctuate, and I know we're outside of an election, but this is quite jaw-dropping. You know, we haven't seen a Labour lead like this since the 1990s, and it's not just this poll. Opinion, 19-point lead. The Prime Minister's net approval falling from -9 to -37 in a week. That's worse than Boris Johnson.
Well, let me tell you also last Thursday, there were two by-elections in my constituency of Rossendale and Darwin, both of which we won with an increased vote for the Conservative Party. The difference between that poll and those by-elections last week is it's a forced decision where people have to make a choice. And I know and believe that when we get to that general election, when we have delivered that growing economy, when we have ensured that the benefit is felt by every household in this country, that it'll be a very different result than shown in that snap poll, a few days after the government has done a mini fiscal event.
OK, well, it's certainly interesting to see your opinion and how different Conservatives are feeling at the minute. It has been, I'll be honest, quite difficult to find people to talk to this conference, perhaps because a lot of them are staying away or they don't necessarily feel that they want to talk to the media right now. There are also reports that some Conservative MPs are even prepared to vote against the budget or the financial measures in the budget. If they did that, would that be treated as a vote of confidence? Would they lose the whip?
Yes.
They would lose the whip?
Correct.
And so do you think as well...
although that is a decision for the Chief Whip, but as far as I'm concerned, yes.
Then they would lose the whip for doing that. Reports also saying that there are people who are even thinking about trying to find a way of instating a new leader, bypassing the members, having an ability to have a say and having MPs to decide. What do you think the reaction to that would be?
Well, look, I mean, what I would say to colleagues is we have a new Prime Minister. She has a mandate both from colleagues and our membership. She absolutely has a plan for this country that will create economic growth, the benefit of which will be felt by every household in this country. We need to get on and implement that plan. We need to unify behind that plan and go out there into our communities in Lancashire, across this country, and advocate our core values of why we are doing this. And I'm sure that if we do that, it will lead ultimately to long-term electoral success. It's
been really interesting talking to you today. I genuinely wasn't really sure, how your sort of manner would be, your demeanour would be today. You're someone who's always, advocated for levelling up, right? Mm-hmm. You've sought out people who may not naturally be Conservative voters. You kind of care about the communities outside of London. How comfortable are you personally with where the Conservative Party is right now and the way forward?
I'm absolutely comfortable with it, and I'll tell you why. Because this idea that I read in the media that people in communities across our United Kingdom, not just in the north but in the southwest, all over the country, voted for Conservatives because in some way they wanted a Labour government, they wanted a sort of Labour-light government or whatever it may be. In my experience, I'm not a pollster, but in my experience of knocking on 14,000 doors over the summer is just completely wrong. What families want is a government that is absolutely determined to create growth for them, to increase their salary, to deliver world-class public services, to be on their side. And that's what they are getting with this government. And on the point of levelling up, in the new tax-free investment zones that the government's announced around the country, we are going to see that agenda turbocharged. And we're going to see new businesses opening, creating those highly paid, secured jobs. That's why I got into politics. I'm proud to be part of a government that is going to deliver for the community and communities that I have the privilege of calling home. I've lived and worked in the North my entire life. I know this government is going to deliver for the North, and I'm proud to be part of that story.
It's a big gamble on growth, though, isn't it? It's all or nothing on growth. How are you so sure that you guys are right? The voting public, as we've seen in the polls, are wrong. Other Conservative MPs are wrong. Many of the people in the markets are wrong. How confident are you?
Well, look, markets both react to government statements, and in my experience, having tracked this over a very long period, often overreact. So let's see where the markets are in 6 months' time.
So do you think they may be overreacted?
No, I say they can overreact. I don't know if they did in this case. I'm not an economist. But let's see where the markets are in 6 months' time. I think that's a far better measure of the success of the mini-budget fiscal event. But secondly, look, in terms of creating that growth, let me tell you a little story. My sister-in-law went to hospital with her father, who lives in a care home and has dementia. He fell over and they had a suspected broken hip. He was in that A&E department with dementia, confused, not knowing where he was, for 10 hours waiting to see a doctor. That is completely unacceptable. And the reason this government wants to create growth is to ensure that we have the money coming into the country, like it comes into every household when you create growth, to give more money to the NHS, to deliver world-class public services. That's what people want to see. That is what this government is going to do, and that's why I'm proud to be part of it.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Jake Berry there, Chair of the Conservative Party. Well, we've been talking about many of the issues this morning. We touched on those poll leads for Labour, mortgage rates, and, of course, talk potentially of real-term cuts to benefits. So, nervy times for the Conservatives around the country. But, of course, we, especially in places like the West Midlands, where we are today, far from a natural heartland for the party, lots of marginal seats here. And the most high-profile elected Conservative in the area is the West Midlands Mayor, Andy Street, and he joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us.
Good morning, Sophie.
Now, before we get on to policy, I want to talk to you about a tweet exchange
yes.
that you had with a certain young Conservative. Just explain to us what happened.
Oh, well, we should do this quickly because it's not a huge issue, but there's an important point behind it. Young Conservative coming here for the conference described in his Twitter Birmingham as, quote-unquote, a dump. Now, you might say, turn the other cheek, but there is a really important point about how perceptions of cities are. We have spent decades trying to rebuild the perception of this place. Think of the success of the Commonwealth Games this summer. Think of the international investment that comes in on the back of that. So my job is always to defend the brand, the reputation of this city, and that's why I took him to task on Twitter.
It's also damaging for the Conservative Party brand, isn't it?
Well, I want everyone who comes here for conference this week. It's why we so enjoy hosting it. And frankly, we'd enjoy hosting it with the Labour Party as well. To go away thinking this place is really making progress, back them, they'll make further progress. So I can't have anyone in the Conservative Party off message.
Now, I'm really interested to have you on the programme this morning because genuinely, I don't know where your head is at, right? The last thing I can see that you tweeted sort of publicly about politics, other than Birmingham-related or West Midlands-related thing, was on the 5th of September when Liz Truss won the leadership contest. Yes. You said the first thing for Liz Truss's in tomorrow's in-trace got to be getting a grip on the cost of living pressures, then doubling down on levelling up. Now, you could argue, of course, that the energy support package was getting a grip on those cost of living pressures. I'm sure you would welcome that. How is doubling down on levelling up going?
Yeah, so let's just acknowledge the first point that you've been fair about. 2 weeks ago, everyone was saying, is the government going to act on the cost of living pressure and, more precisely, the energy cost? And they did decisively. And, of course, we know that as of yesterday, when prices would have gone up, the new price regime comes in. And for a person with an average semi-detached house in this city, it's a saving of about £1,100 against what it would be. So there was decisive action on that, and we should all acknowledge that. In terms of levelling up, that's going to take a little longer. Part, of course, of this conference is to show that if you invest in a region like this, we will deliver, we will pay back. But the first real piece of evidence of levelling up is, of course, the announcement in the mini budget of the investment zones. And I fervently welcome that. We are sitting actually just next to probably the most successful enterprise zone anywhere in Britain that has seen the redevelopment of the city centre here. Investment zones, which will be in many more places, is a sort of enterprise zone on steroids. The policy definitely works. We've proved that. We want to be as quick as can to get that off the ground.
From the interview with Jake Berry, it's very clear that the government is not going to go back on scrapping the 45p rate of additional tax. If you're a millionaire, that would be worth £55,000 to you in a tax cut. And they've also not confirmed that benefits will be uprated in line with inflation. Is that levelling up?
So that is a total decision across the whole country, of course. Levelling up is much more focused, and that's why I've given you the answer I have. But to be really clear, for us to level up generally, you've got to lift the qualifications and the aspirations of the people who are probably the just about managing. There's many of those in this city, and for them the energy price action was absolutely critical, and also, of course, for them the national insurance reduction that applied to everybody was critical. But the most important thing is, where is the jobs of the future going to come from? And that's why I was also very keen to see some of the things in the statement which were about business investment, because they will produce the new sectors, the net zero sectors of the future, the jobs for people in this city.
But if you are a just about managing family in Birmingham, as you say, and you look at the budget and you think, oh my goodness me, I welcome the support and energy bills, but how am I going to afford my food shop? I'm really worried about my public services. And you hear the government say they want to make spending cuts, but they're also going to give a £55,000 tax cut to the very wealthiest.
They have not yet said they are definitely going to make any spending cuts. They're saying they're reviewing public spending. Every government says that in time, because they have to balance the books. Nothing has come through. Actually, if you look at public spending, we're actually committed at the moment to the huge increases in the public spending that Boris Johnson's government brought about, and probably the most important thing, if you ask people in this city, would be the investment in the health service, which, as I understand it, is absolutely stood by.
Are spending cuts the right thing to do?
You should always review government spending. I mean, I ran a huge business for many years. You can't just go on.
John Lewis doesn't get much bigger than that.
Exactly. You can't go on year after year without reviewing your core. That is good business. It's good leadership of the public finances. Would I advocate big cuts in the health service? Of course not. The country is crying out for investment in the health service, and that's why Boris's government did it, and I believe this government will support it. But that doesn't mean, Sophie, we shouldn't have an intelligent conversation about value for money in public spending. And that's what's been proposed.
Would you have liked to have seen a full OBR forecast at the same time in the budget? It's not slated until the 23rd of November.
I'd like to see it come forward very soon as possible, frankly, because there's an issue of confidence here. I mean, what actually has happened last week is the huge majority of things that were done in the financial statement, the market had already expected them and actually was accepting of them. And the biggest issue, of course, was £150 billion for energy, and the market got that. But then there were probably some surprises. And so what we've got to do is actually reassure the market, and one of the best ways of doing that is with the predictions from the OBR.
What surprises do you mean?
Well, it's clear. The Chancellor used the word, didn't he? Rabbits out of the hat. I mean, you couldn't get more evidence that that's where he was thinking. And I think the two things that were probably the surprise was the top rate of tax. And that's what's generated all the observation. But my key point is the huge financial investments were not the surprises, and the market had accepted them before it happened.
Do you support the top rate of tax changes?
If it was me, I wouldn't have done that. To be really clear, I wouldn't have done that. But I understand what the government is attempting to do. I agree with the whole principle of we've got to get growth going. And it's why I voted for Liz Truss, and I stand by that, because we were in a position that really over the last 7 years, we'd seen the underlying rate of growth of this country's economy softening. You cannot pay for all the public services everyone expects with that situation. So a different way of thinking was required, and the huge majority of investment in the financial statement was about that different way of thinking.
And why wouldn't you have done the 45p rate of tax? I know I accept what you're saying about growth and the wider plan, but why specifically that policy?
Because I think that's the lesson of history. If you look at what's happened, certainly in Thatcher's time, in what Reagan did, you have to carry the huge majority of people with you in the early stages of this. And as we're now seeing, that's proving a difficult thing to do. But the principle of what the Prime Minister is doing is saying we are going to have a different approach to growth is one I fully stand by.
You say that you need to bring people with you and the importance of that. And certainly if you look at the polls and look at what Jake Berry says, we're a long way out, a poll is a poll, but there is a clear trend here and it is quite jaw-dropping leads for Labour, the kind of poll leads they haven't seen since the late 1990s.
So I'm sure they're celebrating that. But I'm sure the mood here will be one of utter defiance. We've seen incredibly difficult positions for this party before. Remember May of 2019, Theresa May, European elections, I think we got 9% of the vote. So we are not unused to having to come back from really difficult positions. But the way you do it is you lay out your stall and you demonstrate you are going to deliver. And that's why, coming back to your second question, I would always say the thing this party's got to do is show that it's delivering for people in this region. And my job is to make sure they leave Birmingham even more committed to doing that.
A lot of MPs, though, a lot of Conservative MPs are going to be looking at those polls and they're going to be very, very worried. And the conclusion that they will draw is that the Conservatives are going to lose the next election. And they'd be right, wouldn't they?
Far too soon to draw any conclusion like that. We've seen polls move around. They've moved so quickly just in a few days. So we've seen that fragility in polls. So all that we can do is to double down on the task ahead of us and actually demonstrate that the plan is going to deliver, and so that we can pay for those public services, get the better jobs for people in this region.
OK, just a final thought. Jake Berry committing to climate change targets, but there is some speculation about the government's position on it, particularly with the story that King Charles was advised not to attend the next COP summit. You've obviously been someone who has championed green issues for environmental reasons, also for growth reasons. What would your message be to the government on this?
Do not turn, do not compromise. And actually, there is no conflict between the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis. They actually can be addressed in the same way. It's a critical thing that this party actually has developed really good position on, and we must not compromise. And by the way, go and see our electric bus outside the conference centre, and you will see the investment into net zero in this region.
OK, I'll go and check it out. Thank you very much, Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands. Thank you very much. Well, the Conservatives' relationship with business has been up and down, shall we say, in recent years. Traditionally, of course, the party for business. But then there's been Brexit, the Northern Ireland Protocol, Boris Johnson's supposed F business comment, and now, of course, the current market turmoil. Well, the UK's biggest business organisation, the CBI, has criticised the government for not setting out how it would pay for its tax cuts, although been more supportive of some of the growth measures. But we're joined now by the CBI Director General, Tony Danker. Thank you so much for being with you. It's good to see you in person. I think it's the first time I've actually interviewed you properly.
It is indeed.
In person. What are you hoping to see from conference?
Well, look, I think the test that everyone's been talking about for the last week is whether or not the government is basically being fiscally responsible. I think there's another test at Conservative Party conference. The government set out in this growth plan, nobody's really paid any attention to it, but a set of reforms to drive growth that are normally not the kind of reforms you hear from the Conservative Party. Immigration reform to make sure we have the skills we need. Planning reform. Very often Conservative councils not supportive of planning reform. Net zero is back in fashion. Onshore wind is back in fashion. Now that's what businesses around the country were quite heartened by, but we are nervous as to whether or not the Conservatives really mean what they say. So I'm hoping this week to hear a little bit more from the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, and in the fringe meetings, that really the Conservative Party do put 2.5% growth of primary importance to those other conservative predilections, policies, preferences.
That's interesting, actually, isn't it? Because, look, this is a government that's all about going for growth. And yet the two things that you've been talking about there, immigration and planning reform as well, I mean, they are, in particular, things that is quite difficult for the Conservatives to push through. Do you think there might be a bit of opposition to that?
Yes, I think there might be. And look, those are probably the two things that come up most with businesses around the country in terms of what do we need to drive growth. Everybody is short of labour and skills, and everybody is trying to get projects moving in a country that's hard to get them moving. Now, full credit to the Chancellor and the Prime Minister for putting that in their plan. And I think we'll all be wanting to see that they really mean what they say.
What is your sense on that? You know, because the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has talked about driving immigration, controlling immigration levels, keeping them down. Have you had any sense from the Prime Minister herself that she is prepared to look at immigration levels?
Well, not yet, other than the Chancellor raised it and said there are going to be proposals coming forward. Look, everybody knows, and we saw this at last Conservative Party conference last year, that we aren't going to have uncontrolled immigration, and there isn't a business in the country that's looking for uncontrolled immigration. But the idea that you can overnight close down the borders and not allow in critical skills that we clearly aren't going to grow in Britain soon, that's just putting growth second, not first. And surely now, after the events of the last week, the lesson is growth comes first, not second.
You obviously believe growth should come first. Many other people would say right now that inflation should come first. They're looking at their household bills and they're deeply concerned. They're looking at what's happening to mortgages and they are frankly terrified about what will happen if they are up for renewal anytime soon. And surely the biggest tax-cutting programme for half a century, isn't that just going to stoke inflation?
Well, I think it raises two risks, doesn't it? The first is it's inflationary, and the second is, and I think this is what the markets were reacting to, that it undermines your ability to bring down debt in the long run. And I think that's right. So you have to look at whether or not these tax cuts are going to drive growth. Now, we don't comment a lot on personal income tax. It's not really our business. I'm not convinced those cuts are going to drive growth.
So just to be crystal clear here, you're talking about the decision to scrap the additional rate of tax for everyone earning over 150,000. You don't think that will really move the dial on growth?
Look, if you ask me for 30 measures that are going to drive up growth, I wouldn't put it in the top 30. Now, the Chancellor may feel differently. He might want to set out why he thinks it's going to stimulate growth. At the same time, clearly reversing employers' national insurance, clearly not putting up corporation tax by 6 points, those things will be helpful to growth and competitiveness. So, look, I think there's a lot of reasons why the markets find the budget not credible. I think you're alluding to some of them that are right. But I think the Chancellor and the Prime Minister now need to come forward and explain what they've done, why they've done it, why they think it'll work. And at the very least, not row back from some of the commitments that they have made to supply-side reform.
How about spending cuts? Are you concerned about the idea about cutting spending?
Yes, but look, I think when you borrow £600 billion, if you take the 450 of the pandemic, the 150 of the energy crisis, you're trying to bring down debt in the medium term. You're clearly going to have a plan that's going to have a mix of spending cuts, perhaps some tax rises, I would have thought, as well as some growth. Now, the exact balance of that, we are wait to hear what the government's view is, but I'd be surprised if you could keep growing public spending as fast as you can. But you need to be careful, because we all know that after the pandemic, there are critical public services that need to be restored. That's why the medium-term plan is going to be tough work.
Tough work. Is there a fairness argument here as well? I know you obviously speak on behalf of businesses, but businesses employ people, don't they, as well? Is there a fairness argument when you look at what has been not said, or rather not said, about uprating benefits and that personal tax level cut?
Yeah, there is absolutely a fairness argument. I have spoken to businesses all week, and the first thing on their mind was the fairness argument. I don't accept that you have to trade off growth with fairness. I think you should have growth and you should have fair distribution of wealth. And I think that's the economy we should be trying to build. So, yes, I'm absolutely, as are most of the businesses I speak to, worried about the cost of living crisis almost above everything.
That's interesting. And what would you like to see happen on that?
Well, look, I think let's wait for the Chancellor to come forward. I'm not going to try and pre-empt what needs to come. We've got ourselves into a difficult position. By the way, we were always going to. I think one of the things the public has to accept is that if we're going to have £450 billion COVID bailout, the government have done a £150 billion energy payout. There weren't going to be any easy choices. So I cut the government some slack for that. but I think they need to restore fiscal credibility, exactly as you say. That's to do with inflation and debt. And they need to follow through this week on some things that aren't very popular in Conservative circles. Those are the reforms that will genuinely get the economy growing.
Do they also need to bring forward forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility? They're not due till the end of November.
Yes, I think that's right. Look, as soon as they can do them, the better. But let's be honest, we need to get them right. And getting them right involves the government suggesting the plans they want to do, the OBR giving them fiscal implications of those plans. It's an iterative process. So I don't want to rush it so that it's done badly. It needs to be done well, but the sooner we see it, I think the more we'll all know where we're headed.
Liz Truss saying this morning that she won't be publishing them any earlier. Do you think that's the right decision?
Look, I think if it takes that long to get a good plan, take that long. What you'll need to do instead, in the interim period, is demonstrate on a daily, weekly basis that you are absolutely committed to growth, that you're concerned about inflation and debt, and whatever the government can do to give the market that reassurance, given that the markets are lending us the money, I think they'll find a way to do that.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Really good to talk this morning. Tony Danker there of the CBI. Well, the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, did try to calm the nerves of increasingly concerned Conservative MPs this week when he told them we're all one team. He asked them for patience and support to implement his economic plans. But there is some concern among many MPs as repeated polls show Labour with very significant leads that we've been talking about this morning. Well, we're joined now by the Conservative MP for South Derbyshire and former Junior Minister Heather Wheeler. Thank you so much for being with us. Getting up early here to Birmingham to come and talk to us this morning. How would you describe the mood among Conservative MPs at this conference?
Well, it's interesting. I must be on different WhatsApp groups to everybody else because I haven't had a single Tory MP tell me that things are doom and gloom. I think I remember after the fiscal statement, was it 5 newspapers that said this is the best statement the Conservative government has ever made? And I know a week's a long time in politics, but should we just calm down a bit? Should we just see the growth plan? Should we just make sure this is going to happen and get behind the leader that was undeniably elected in the summer?
You say to calm down, but you must acknowledge, though, that many of your colleagues will be looking at those extraordinary poll leads for Labour. They'll be looking at the extraordinary intervention that happened by the Bank of England to effectively stop a run on pension funds. You can see why they're a bit nervous, right?
I can, except, of course, what is the real poll? The real poll are elections, and what happened on Thursday, 2 massive wins for the Conservatives up in Jake Berry's constituency. So people actually voted Conservative. With all this noise going on, people voted Conservative. And that's what I hold on to. The important thing here is we've got a growth plan. It's going to take time. We're going to have more meat on the bones on the 23rd of November, my daughter's birthday, so I remember it very, very well. Really looking forward to it. And it's going to be a great day, and that's what we need to do. We've got to be subtle, we've got to be tenacious, we've got to lay out what that growth plan is about. It's our duty to get our economy going again. It's our duty to make sure that inflation is sorted out. It's our duty to make sure that pensioners and other people have absolutely got a future that they know that they want to pass on to their grandchildren. That's our job.
How concerned are you by talk of spending cuts? Because, look, we can all see the economic picture here. We can all see that we're spending more on debt interest repayments in the education budget. But it's been very clear from this government that tax rises are not the way they want to go. How do you think spending cuts are acceptable? Jake Berry's is talking about trimming the fat. Or do you think that many of your constituents might be very worried about the idea to cuts to their public services?
Well, you had Andy Street on just before me, and Andy and I are really old friends. I thought his answer to you on this question was really sensible. Any business looks at what they've got. Any business looks at not spending money on things that they don't need to spend money on. Any new Prime Minister will have new priorities. Any new Chancellor will have new priorities. And it's absolutely right that they look at the budgets. That doesn't mean cuts. It means where are we going to spend more on? That's the way we should be looking at this.
According to Liz Truss this morning, she didn't consult with Cabinet on scrapping the 45p rate of additional tax on all of those earning above £150,000. She said it was Kwasi Kwarteng's decision. How much concern is there among your colleagues about that specific policy?
I think what that actually tells you is that she believes in departmental government. She believes in a cabinet where the secretaries of state of their department, they know the budget they're going to get. Let's run it properly. Let's run it like Conservatives. Let's have new priorities. That's what we need to do. And that's exactly what, we are fed up, aren't we, with the settee, what did it used to be called? The couch politics where everybody just sits around and makes a decision. No, it's not work like that. If you're a Secretary of State, you run a big department. You've got a perm secretary, you've got 2 deputy perm secretaries now. I mean, goodness me, there's inflation for you. But that didn't used to happen. So why's that happened? Really weird.
So take your orders from the PM and keep quiet.
No, the Secretary of State runs their department with the priorities that are Conservative priorities. And that's incredibly important.
OK, well, let's talk a little bit about what is happening among backbenchers. Jake Berry said that any Conservative MP who votes against the budget, so if you want to vote against abolishing the 45p rate of tax, that should be a confidence issue. You should lose the whip. Do you agree?
I've been a whip twice.
You know more than any then.
Perhaps more than any. And, it's a vote of confidence. If it's a financial motion for the government, it's a vote of confidence, and that's all there is to it. But we shouldn't get bent out of shape over this. There's a really interesting interview with Laffer curve. So, I mean, I don't want to do an economics programme on you here, but this is where you have every single government that has ever reduced the top rate of tax in the first 2 years have increased the tax take. That's what all this is about. It's increasing the tax take so that we do have tax money to pay for the public services. You can't have public services unless you have tax.
You can see, though, your colleagues looking at those polls, feeling, frankly, that they don't agree with the direction that the Prime Minister is taking the country in without an election. And now they're being told that they'll be effectively have the whip suspended or be removed from the whip if they make their unhappiness known.
That's what the whips are for. You go and talk to your whip. That's exactly what the whips are for. But I urge my colleagues, actually what happened last Thursday, we had elections, we won elections overwhelmingly. The Laffer curve proves that if you reduce the tax top rate, you earn more income tax for your government. And that means we can do much more with public services. And that's what I want to do. And that looks after everybody. That's the whole point. Reducing the tax to 19p for everybody is incredibly important. But if you reduce the 45, you get a bigger tax take for the government, and it means we can support public services where we need to.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Heather Wheeler, they're good to have you on the programme. That was Heather Wheeler, backer of Liz Truss, very supportive, of course, of the way the government is going. And, of course, we can talk to an MP now who may have a slightly different take. Usually when the government makes major changes to tax and spending, say a budget, and this was a mega budget, let's be honest, the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility would release official forecasts. Well, that didn't happen when the Chancellor announced his recent package of tax cuts, adding, of course, to market concern about the impact on the national debt. Well, we can talk now to the Treasury Committee. Its chair, Conservative MP and former Treasury Minister Mel Stride joins us now. You've been critical of the decision not to publish the OBR report alongside the government. Liz Truss has said this morning there are no plans to bring that publication forward from when they are currently slated 23rd of November. Is that good enough?
No, I don't think it is, because right at the heart of the problems we're discussing here is a lack of confidence that the markets have had in the fiscal credibility of the government's policies. And the way that you establish that fiscal credibility is you have, firstly, credible fiscal targets, and we don't yet know what those are or when they're going to bite. Secondly, you have the OBR score all the measures, including the spending measures that you've probably been talking about earlier in the programme. And thirdly, you have to have the OBR saying that all of that adds up to hitting those particular targets. Now, the question then becomes, when is the best time to come forward with that OBR forecast? Now, it's certainly the case you can't prematurely bring it forward, and tomorrow morning would be too early, for example, because it is an iterative process and it takes time. But I know from my discussions with the OBR that they will be ready by the end of this month to bring a full forecast forward, as opposed to the current date, which is the 23rd of November. And why that's important, Sophie, is for two reasons. Firstly, that the earlier you get that out there, assuming that all the numbers stack up and the markets are comfortable with it, the sooner you can start to calm those markets. And the second reason is that the Monetary Policy Committee will meet on the 3rd of November, i.e. well before the 23rd of November, in order to take its decision on how high to raise interest rates. If it has a satisfactory OBR report before that meeting on the 3rd of November, I would imagine and expect that the interest rate rise will probably not be as high as it otherwise would be. And the reason for that is that OBR report, the fiscal targets, would have reassured the markets. There'll be less concern about the inflationary impacts of the government's policy, and therefore the MPC will be putting interest rates up by potentially, and I do stress potentially, a little bit less. And I say that because these decisions are very finely balanced. The last MPC meeting, for example, the vote was split 3 ways as to where the movement in interest rates should go. So for stability reasons and keeping it rates as low as we can and taking the pressure off people with mortgages, etc., we need to have that OBR forecast before the end of this month.
So just to be crystal clear, the decision to not bring forward the publication of the OBR, that, in your view, is going to directly hit people's mortgages?
I use the word potentially because to the extent that the lack of that forecast means that there's greater uncertainty in the markets, which that forecast could have calmed down, and to the extent that that in turn leads members of the Monetary Policy Committee to conclude that they need to raise rates a little bit higher than they would otherwise had to have done, then yes, there will be a direct knock-on cost. And that's why it is, amongst other reasons, so important that OBR forecast and the fiscal rules the government's going to work to are brought forward by the end of this month.
Now, you've also written to the Chancellor asking him to give evidence to the Select Committee that you're chair of the Treasury Select Committee as soon as possible in the wake of the budget. Have you got a reply yet?
No, my latest letter, in fact, we got in touch with the Chancellor's office a few weeks ago. We were told that he wouldn't be in a position to appear before the committee until after the medium-term fiscal plan is presented on the 23rd of November. I wrote to him earlier this week to say that I needed to hear from him, to see him before then, and I've requested a reply from him no later than the close of business on Monday. So I have not yet received, to my knowledge at least, unless it's sitting in somebody's inbox somewhere, I haven't yet received a response to that, but I would hope to and expect to by the end of Monday.
OK, now I'm interested to know your thoughts about the way forward. Obviously, one of the reasons that the markets were quite jittery were because of levels of borrowing. Jake Berry on the programme today saying there will be a review of spending, talking about trimming the fat from government's expenditure. How comfortable are you with the idea of cutting money from public services?
I think it's going to be very tough indeed, because one of the consequences of higher than expected inflation compared to what was expected at the time that those budgets were set is that, of course, departments have already had a real terms budget cut. And if you look at the big budgets like health, like social security, like education and so on, they are going to be, welfare in particular, they're going to be very difficult really to lean too hard into. I think, in order to make those cuts. And there's been much debate, for example, about whether there should be an inflationary uprating of benefits. Well, they were last uprated at quite a low rate. Yeah.
Just to jump in, what is your view on the uprating of benefits? Do you think they should be uprated in line with inflation?
I think we need to have a debate about all these kind of measures in the round at the time that we have all the detail. And, of course, we don't yet have all the detail, but I do think there are some very difficult political optics, at the very least, around having the 45p rate abolished and then seeking reductions, for example, in the welfare bill. Now, if you were to uprate welfare payments by earnings rather than inflation, you would save about £5 or £6 billion. You've got to put that in the context of an additional £72 billion that's taking place as a consequence of £45 billion worth of unfunded tax cuts. So that gives you a sense of how far you've got to push in a politically difficult direction in order to try and square the books here through leaning into expenditure.
I think it also gives us a sense of your own views on it potentially as well. Liz Truss said this morning that she didn't consult the Cabinet on the scrapping of the 45p rate of tax. That was a decision for the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, she said. Do you think she should have sought a bit more advice?
I think she has also said, I think, that she feels that perhaps the ground should have been laid better for the fiscal event last Friday. And I think I would put that in that category. In other words, it appears to me that this has been done at certainly, a lot of stuff done at huge pace, quite a radical approach to institutions and individuals and processes and the norms. And amongst those various things, yes, I think something like a move like that, you want to take your cabinet with you, you would want to discuss it with them. And I think that's typically how that would have happened in the past.
Jake Berry is also very clear that, as far as he's concerned, if any Conservative MP votes against the budget or the measures announced in the budget, that would be seen as a confidence vote. So effectively, they would have the whip removed. Do you think that's the right decision?
That's always typically been the case, that if you vote against a major fiscal measure in a finance bill, then that is considered a vote of confidence against the government, and the consequence of that would be to have the whip removed. So I think if that is the position that is adopted, then I don't think it'd be reasonable to say that that's out of sync with what has happened in the past. I think the question really will be around the practical politics of that, because clearly if there are a number of backbenchers or a groundswell of resistance to a particular measure, then that would be problematic. It is a question of whether you can hold the dam or not, if you like, on that. And of course, sometimes these pushes on particular points can be resolved before you even reach that point, because the government will, on occasion, amend the proposals that it's putting forward. None of that, of course, on the 45p will come in for some time, because that will be in a finance bill probably in the early part of next year.
At the same time, though, it's been pretty clear from what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng have said since the budget that they have no intention of reversing the 45p measure. Given that, how many of your colleagues do you think might end up voting against it?
Oh, well, look, I'm not going to get into speculating around potential future rebellion sometime next year. As I said earlier, I think the important thing, and I'm sure that most of my colleagues will be doing this, will be we want to know the full extent of this package. We want to know where these spending cuts that the government's now talking about are going to fall and what they will mean, and indeed, how they will impact lower income families who are, as always, at times of economic toil, generally the group that suffer the most. So I think I and all my colleagues will want to take a level-headed, calm and reasonable look at the entire package that's on offer here.
It doesn't sound like you are entirely sure how you will be voting on some of these measures. I take the point that you want to look at it in the round, but is that still an open question?
Well, I don't want to sort of endlessly repeat myself, Sophie, but this is a very big fiscal intervention. It has many moving parts with huge consequences for the economy and indeed for individuals and families and businesses up and down the country. There's a lot happening, and I think it's only right, particularly when we get this OBR forecast, and as I say, the earlier the better, that we really have a chance to look at that and look at the detail and see how it all fits together, what the distributional impacts are, for example, of all the measures that are being undertaken. And quite rightly, the government is saying that the intervention on supporting households with their fuel bills will be disproportionately beneficial to those lower income households, because they have a higher proportion of their expenditure that's accounted for by energy costs. So there are swings and roundabouts here, and you have to look at it in the round.
Briefly, because I'm out of time, but I want to squeeze one more in. Will Liz Truss lead the Conservative Party into the next election?
Sorry, I slightly missed that. When? So say again.
Will Liz Truss lead the Conservative? Will Liz Truss? Yeah, will she?
I certainly hope so, because for that to happen, I think it's fair to say that we have to fairly quickly move to a place where the polls are beginning to turn around, where the markets are feeling that the government is behaving fiscally responsible and they're gaining in confidence, and the pressure on the pound is being released somewhat, and bond yields are not soaring off as we see them do in the past.
And if that doesn't happen,
so then I think we are in hugely difficult waters.
OK, interesting stuff. Mel Stride, thank you very much indeed. We are out of time. Now, Vladimir Putin has again made veiled threats to use nuclear weapons following his illegal annexation of some 50% of Ukraine this week. Feels a very important story for us to cover today here. We're in Birmingham for Conservative Conference, but of course the war in Ukraine continues with sham referendums in 4 regions, which Ukrainian forces are still fighting to liberate. Well, we can talk now to our next guest. She's been on the programme before. We're delighted to have her with us again, the Ukrainian MP Lesia Vasylenko, who will be speaking at conference this week. Thank you so much for being with us. We know, of course, you're going to be speaking to the Conservatives at conference. Boris Johnson was always a key ally of President Zelensky. Are you seeing the same from Liz Truss?
We are seeing the same from Liz Truss, also from her government. We were extremely happy that the Minister of Defence didn't change. So we have a continuity there of support for the Ukrainian military, of collaboration with the Ukrainian Minister for Defence. And of course, all this means that UK and Ukraine continue to work on their strong strategic partnership.
I want to talk a little bit about the situation on the ground in Ukraine. We all know, of course, about the extraordinary bravery of the Ukrainians in a war that many people expected would be over in a matter of weeks. You're continuing to retake territory. What is the situation on the ground and how optimistic or not are you?
I'm fairly optimistic, and despite Putin trying to distract from the advances of the Ukrainian army in the east of Ukraine, the Ukrainian army is still advancing, regardless of the annexation announcements, regardless of the sham referendum. All of that is absolutely meaningless when it comes to the Ukrainian military units coming forward and liberating the Ukrainian people and reinstalling the Ukrainian flag in, pretty much all across the east of Ukraine. So we have the Luhansk region, Donetsk region. We have advancements being made in Zaporizhia and Kherson today and over the coming days as well. So it's looking pretty good on the front lines for Ukraine. But of course, we are still reliant on the support that we are getting from our allies, including the UK, in terms of weapons and in terms of ammunition. We need those to be coming in larger numbers and in faster time for Ukraine to secure a quick victory, because a quick victory is exactly what the whole world needs today. We cannot be fighting this war for another year or years to come. This will deplete Ukraine, this will deplete the resources of the allies, and this will strengthen the tyranny and the empire that Putin is trying to build so desperately.
At the same time, of course, Putin has held these sham referenda in 4 regions of Ukraine where, surprise, surprise, people voted to join Russia. How is Ukraine responding to that?
The thing is, people didn't vote. So that's the whole point of a sham referenda, where you have the results fixed and where you have a bare minimum of respondents. So some 2, maybe 3% of the population of all these regions were participating in the referenda. And a lot of the answers were obtained by actually holding people at gunpoint or by inflicting threats on people and their families. And even at that, some were still responding in the negative, that they didn't want to join Russia. And again, I go back to the survey results. 2% of the population of those regions voted. That's hardly the will of the people. You know, this is how Ukraine looks on these referenda. They're just nothing. They're just, a fiction of Putin's imagination, who would like to see his empire reinstated. But we as, normal, sane people who want to live in the free world, who are fighting for democracy and freedom, we cannot take seriously the fantasies of a psychopathic tyrant leader.
Do we need to take them seriously, though? Because he has also hinted at the use of nuclear weapons. He said that the regions are now part of Russia, so he's justified to protect them by all available means. And he also says there's a precedent created by the United States to use nuclear weapons. How worried are you about that?
Well, Sophie, in all honesty, he has been threatening nuclear threats from February onwards. None of them materialized. The fact that he now has a legal ground in his mind to treat these territories as if they were Russia changes nothing, because on the onset, on the 24th of February, the Russians invaded Ukraine saying that they are liberating Ukraine from something, essentially implying that they were already treating these territories as if they were Russia. And Putin was clear that he would be prepared to go to all means. In March, he mobilized, or he said that he was mobilizing the nuclear arsenal to be ready for deployment at any point. It still wasn't used. I think that Russia and the Russian line of command realized first the consequences of the use of such weapons, first and foremost for the people in Russia, because it's a nuclear weapon. It's not going to be contained within a set territory. The aftermath is going to spread, the results are going to spread to the territory of Russia. And second, the consequences of using those weapons will trigger a response from other nuclear powers. And I don't think that's in the interest of Russia or of Putin, no matter how crazy and how power mad he is.
As I said, it's a real pleasure to have you on the programme, and we can only imagine, frankly, what the last 9 months or so has been like for people in Ukraine. So I just wondered if you might feel comfortable sharing a bit of that with us. You're obviously a politician, you're out there, you're making the arguments for more help for Ukraine. You're also someone who's been pictured with an AK-47, saying that you'd be prepared to fight for your country. And you're also a mother. I think I'm right in saying that your youngest was still a baby when the war broke out. How has it been for you and for your family?
A roller coaster. That's to sum it up in one word. And I think it's been like that for all families in Ukraine. One day we smile and we can't help smiling because of the advances of the Ukrainian military at the front lines. The next day we have some news coming in from the Kremlin, which is very much offsetting. And we realize that it's probably part of some kind of psychological attack. On the next day, I will be in tears several times a day because of the news coming in of the convoys, of the civilian convoys that have been shot at, and seeing the pictures of mothers like me with children who were trying to get to safety, who were just shot point blank in their faces or in their backs. That's, those are things that your brain just can't, how do you say it, the word psychologically, compartmentalize, basically put into boxes and into compartments. It just gets to you. The war gets to you. And I have to live in awareness that I am living this war and my family is living this war with me, no matter how far I am able to actually put them out from the country and into safety. But, every single Ukrainian will be affected and is affected already. And it's the pain and the tragedy and the aftermath of the war, which we will still have to deal with even after the Russian soldiers leave Ukrainian land.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing a bit of your story. I'm sure that myself and all of our viewers would be hoping for a better future for yourself and your family, and also, of course, all families in Ukraine as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that is it for this week's Sophy Ridge on Sunday. We're live here, of course, at the Conservative Party conference. In a moment after the break, we're going to be running through today's interviews to see what we learned alongside our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, plus the podcast available, Sophy Ridge on Sunday podcast. That should be available from around lunchtime. In the meantime, thanks for joining us here in Birmingham this Sunday morning. hello, welcome back to Birmingham, where we are at the Conservative Party conference. You're watching Sophy Ridge, The Take, where we digest what we've heard in the last hour of Sophy Ridge on Sunday. But also, of course, it is a mega weekend for the Conservative Party. Liz Truss, really a defining moment of her premiership already after that mega budget. So to discuss all of that, we're joined live by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Well, I was interested in the interview that we had with Jake Berry, the chair of the Conservative Party. Is there going to be any sniff of acknowledgement of the market reaction to the mega budget, as I think I'm going to call it, or the dissent among so many Conservative MPs? And to be honest, he came out with a very strong defence, if you like, of the way forward. Absolutely no sign that there was going to be any rowing back.
That's right, Sophie. So here we are. Liz Truss has been Prime Minister for 26 days, of which 11 have been during a period of national mourning. And just to remind viewers that during that period, her government has spent £160 billion. We've had sterling drop to the lowest level since 1985. We've had the UK economy put on downgrade watch by the markets. The Bank of England's done an emergency intervention. Mortgages, cheap mortgages, have been withdrawn from the market, and the Conservatives have had the lowest polling results, really, since YouGov was founded. And so I was fascinated in the tone from Jake Berry, Conservative Party chairman, actually so long a critic. He knows how to duff up prime ministers. Actually, Jake Berry came on here, and what really struck me about his tone in that interview with you was just how fighty he was.
He was very, yeah, well, he was robust, I think, is one word that you'd use, of robust, fighty, whichever one you go for. But he came out here, it was as if he was pumped up, wasn't it? You know, he was ready to vociferously defend, the meeting that he'd had, the drinks reception post-conference with the Chancellor and with, as he described it, the people who were the engines of the economy, as others would describe it, hedge fund managers, financiers. He was robust in going against the polling that we showed him, showing a record leads for the Labour Party, leads not seen since the 1990s. Well, hang on, look at a couple of by-elections we've had in Rossendale was his response to that. That's real voting. And as you were saying as well, the markets, according to him, were overreacting.
So sometimes, Sophie, I think that politics is kind of fought out entirely in studios like this one. There's a national debate, there's one side, there's another, you fight it out, and the public decide who the winner is. This time it's different, though. And the reason it's different right now is because whatever we say, whatever Jake Berry says on this programme, there are some facts on the ground that are changing that are very ominous. Now, I know a lot of people, particularly on a Sunday morning, slightly switch off when they hear the word markets and market reaction. And it is complex, but it's important. And what's going on at the moment is the markets are slightly taking fright of this government, the scale of its spending, the way it treats supposedly independent institutions. And that's having an impact on everybody's life. It's making mortgages more expensive. It's making borrowing for business harder. And so it's all very well for Jake Berry to come out and mount his defence. But it sounded to me, when he talked to you earlier, like he was kind of saying the market's got it wrong.
Let's have a listen, shall we?
Markets both react to government statements, and in my experience, having tracked this over a very long period, often overreact. So let's see where the markets are in 6 months' time.
So do you think they may be overreacted?
No, I say they can overreact. I don't know if they did in this case. I'm not an economist, but let's see where the markets are in 6 months' time. I think that's a far better measure of the success of the mini-budget fiscal event.
Markets overreact, according to Jake Berry. The markets aren't a person. They aren't sentient beings. They don't have emotions. They do what they do on the basis of a risk calculation. They are judging the Truss government risky, and some of her allies know it.
Talking about some of her allies, another person I was quite interested to hear their voice was Andy Street. He supported Liz Truss in the leadership contest. He was very careful to talk about the things that he believed the government was doing right on growth, saying that was the right thing to do. But there were clearly a few things that he disagreed with, and he wasn't afraid of saying that.
No. And here we had one of the first big figures in the Conservative Party who can't be dismissed as a Sunak ally because Andy Street voted for Liz Truss, coming out and saying that the 45p tax rate abolition, so basically getting the tax cut for people owning over £150,000, getting rid of that 45p rate, which, by the way, I mean, some people are £70,000 a year better off if they're earning in the millions. Quite extraordinary, given what's happening lower down on the income scale. He came out on your show and said that was wrong.
So what we've got to do is actually reassure the market, and one of the best ways of doing that is with the predictions from the OBR.
What surprises do you mean?
Well, it's clear. The Chancellor used the word, didn't he? Rabbits out of the hat. I mean, you couldn't get more evidence that that's where he was thinking. And I think the two things that were probably the surprise was the top rate of tax. And that's what's generated all the observation. But my key point is the huge financial investments were not the surprises, and the market had accepted them before it happened.
Do you support the top rate of tax changes?
If it was me, I wouldn't have done that, to be really clear.
You know what, I do quite enjoy interviewing mayors. Just as an aside, I do quite enjoy interviewing mayors.
Well, they have their own power base.
They have their own power base, they've got their own mandate, and they are often a little bit more free. Even someone like Andy Street, who clearly wants to be broadly helpful to Liz Truss, it's always quite nice to...
I just want to shout the words Boris Johnson at you and look away. Absolutely, because a lot of Tory MPs, the upside of British politics, but also the downside. There's a lot of Tory MPs, but not at this conference, actually sort of reining what they think in public because they want a job. They want a bit of patronage. Those jobs come with higher salaries, so they don't necessarily get out there and punch their own government for what it's doing because, you know, there's just a chance that they could be Secretary of State for paper clips. That's not true of our mayors.
Let's talk a bit about Conservative Party rebellions, shall we? The other thing that I thought was very interesting from Jake Berry was that he was clear that in his mind, if you vote against anything in the budget, in the finance bill, which we're not expecting, of course, till next year, that's a confidence issue. You should lose the whip.
Yes. He then slightly rode back from that by saying, well, of course, it would be the chief whip who makes the final decision on that, but it's clear what direction of travel they're going in. They want to basically stop anybody who votes against that from being a Conservative MP and presumably standing in the next election. We want to have a fight on this big thing. It's bold talk. Often you talk quite bold at this stage of a big political fight.
Doing it.
But you touch there on one of the bizarrest political calculations that they've made. The Truss government announced almost 2 weeks ago, just over 2 weeks ago, that they were going to scrap taxes, lower taxes for the richest. They're going to actually make life a little bit harder for those at the lower end of the spectrum by forcing them to work more. But this is all going to be put into legislation. It's all going to be voted on not until March. So we've got about 6 months for Conservatives to think hard about whether they think that this is a wise political path to go down, whether they think that the markets are reacting sensibly, and decide whether or not they're going to support it all the way through in that distance. We'll know a lot more by March. I mean, things are very, very fluid on a day-to-day basis. But I have to say, Sophie, you're just getting signs from all sorts of Tory MPs that they might not. I mean, I thought you got a pretty big neon sign above Mel Stride making that clear.
Well, I have to say, even though he was trying to couch it, look, you know, we have to look at it in the round. He absolutely was not ruling out voting against some of those budget measures, which, as you say, that's a big neon sign. And this is someone who used to be in the Treasury. He's chair of the Treasury Select Committee, and he clearly has some pretty big concerns. He's not the only one.
No, another name this morning is Michael Gove, one of the most famous cabinet, along with Liz Truss, one of the longest-serving cabinet ministers, of course, until Liz Truss's government came along, at which point Michael Gove was out and sacked because he backed Rishi Sunak, because Liz Truss has a sort of fairly famously difficult relationship with him. So you've got a sense there that there are people gearing up for a fight. There are many, many more below the surface, I have to say, who talk privately to me about what to do. They are very, very worried about the direction of travel because of the impact of the market on mortgages. Now, the biggest thing that this government has done, as Jake Berry made clear, as Liz Truss has been out and about making clear this morning, is spend a huge amount of money, £160 billion, trying to keep energy prices lower. Now, that's going to save people probably somewhere in the region of about £1,000 a year off their energy bills because of spiking prices. We all know that. But what I'm not sure everybody's come to grips with, and this is the scary bit, it's the bit that's scaring Tory MPs, is that mortgage rates are going up. Now, of course, lots of people are on fixed-rate deals, but 2 million people, 1.8 million people over the next year will have to renegotiate their fixed-rate deal. When they signed it, interest rates are incredibly low, maybe 1%, 2%. Now you've already got base rates at near, 2.5 or so. You are remortgaging at 4% or 5%. In English, this is hundreds of pounds a month on millions of people's mortgages. Now, you thought the cost of living pressures were high already on the basis of inflation and on the basis of energy prices. You ain't seen nothing yet if market instability feeds through to higher mortgage costs, meaning people can't afford their houses.
Let's have a quick listen, shall we, to the CBI Director General. This is Tony Danker. One of these people who, again, the CBI, was relatively welcoming of some of the measures in the budget. He thinks that growth is a good thing to be pursuing. But I was struck this morning by the criticisms he had. Let's have a quick listen to what he said.
So, look, I think there's a lot of reasons why the markets find the budget not credible. I think you're alluding to some of them that are right. But I think the Chancellor and the Prime Minister now need to come forward and explain what they've done, why they've done it, why they think it'll work. And at the very least, not row back from some of the commitments that they have made to supply-side reform.
You do get a sense of a bit of concern, don't you?
Gosh, yes. Now, we're in the middle of the exhibition hall in Birmingham. You can see the Thatcher Theatre behind us, but in front of me are all sorts of stands for all sorts of different companies. And I can see all around there are the big banks. There's Lloyds over there, there's Barclays over there. And I think there are a lot of people from corporate Britain here looking for reassurance, kind of in the way that that Tony Danker was just talking about. They want to know that this is not a government that attacks the independent institutions that underpin us, like the Bank of England. Even after the firing of Tom Scholar, they want to know that Whitehall will still play a big role issuing warnings and that they'll be listened to. They don't like the way that the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the kind of financial watchdog, has been sidelined. All these things are part of why markets trust the United Kingdom. And the denigration of some of those institutions are part of the reason, along with all that big spending, why they've lost a little bit of faith and people's mortgages are going up.
Just to finish, I want to talk a little bit about Jake Berry and the defence he mounted for a story in the Sunday Times today. Now, just to remind people, this is a story in the Sunday Times saying that in the hours after the budget on Friday, the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, was in a room of people, including hedge fund managers, including Jake Berry, drinking champagne, although Jake Berry said that actually Kwasi Kwarteng was drinking a soft drink, I think. Let's have a listen now to what Jake Berry said. Is there an optics problem?
We often have drinks receptions for donors in the Conservative Party, and in fact these people should be lauded because we don't have public funding of political parties, and these are people who go out and make money and donate to political parties in the same way as they do for the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. In terms of that get-together, it wasn't a get-together of hedge fund managers, it was actually Britain's sort of leading entrepreneurs. Yes, I was there, but it's the sort of normal drumbeat of treasurers at events, as we call them in the Conservative Party, that we have all the time.
What do you make of this, Sam?
Well, look, the essay question for Liz Truss this week is, can she show whose side she's on? So, stories like that just do not help. Kwasi Kwarteng hot-footing from a mini-budget, mega-budget, in which he's cut taxes for the richest, made life a little bit harder for those on the lowest end of the income scale, to a party in Chelsea with a hedge fund Tory donor, 30 other hedge fund Tory donors, financiers, business people. It just makes it look like the party, the Conservative Party, potentially the party for the rich, the toxic thing that they've always had. Now,
and Labour picking up on that on conference as well. Jake Berry there talking about, these guys are the engines of the economy, these wealthy financiers and business people. Rachel Reeves saying, actually, no, the engines of the economy are the people who works in the schools and the hospitals and so on.
Labour also wanted to know what's actually said at these events. Now, I've been talking today, recently, to people who go to these types of events that Kwasi Kwarteng is at, in the last few weeks, in fact. And what shocks them is just how casual Kwasi Kwarteng is about expressing quite out there views. Now, they're not market sensitive. The government are absolutely right to say he hasn't breached any confidences. But, for instance, he expresses incredibly strong views about the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, and people who work at the Bank of England underneath him. Not pretty views, it has to be said. And I think that kind of thing, that kind of carelessness in their view, is another reason why some in the city, some in the markets are just that little bit worried about this government. It's a whole package of things, a whole suite of things that people are worrying about right now. That's why this conference is going to be fascinating.
Fascinating, and it could not be more important as well. Sam, always good to talk. Thank you very much for setting your alarm and getting on early with us this morning. Sam Coates, they're our Deputy Political Editor. And as Sam was just saying, really the stakes could not be higher for the Prime Minister and her Chancellor this conference here in Birmingham. She's been talking this morning. No sign of any change, of course, after the market reaction and, of course, the poll reaction to that budget. And certainly that was the impression that we had on the programme this morning. There's going to be lots more coverage of this conference here on Sky News going forward. And do make sure you check out the podcast if you're interested in the show and some of the analysis behind the scenes. That will be with myself and our political correspondent Liz Bates coming up later today. Well, that's it from Sophy Ridge on Sunday. The Take this morning. Good to see you this Sunday. We'll see you on Wednesday.